Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Raw Life Health Show. I'm so excited about today's guest because I always love interviewing people who've been eating a raw food diet for a long time. But today's guest is not just a person eating a raw food diet. It's a good friend of mine, and it's a woman because most people that do a raw food diet a long time are men. Everybody, this is Karen Ranzi. Welcome, Karen, to the show.
Hi, so nice to be here with you, Paul, and so long since we've known each other and really started this path around the same time back in the 90s.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for everyone, Karen is 100% raw vegan diet for 28 years, and we're going to hear about that today. But she has an amazing story about her family and her children, and just everything's wonderful. But Karen, say hello to the audience and tell them a little about yourself.
Yeah, hello, everybody, and welcome to this wonderful podcast. Which I'm so excited because Paul was out there speaking before anybody else was. I mean, back in the 90s, I remember him just doing so many talks. And so really the goal is to spread this valuable health message. I have been a vegetarian since I'm 17 years old. So that's over 50 years. And I was very fortunate to have this inspiration right in my very own family, because my grandmother back in 1921 had asthma and emphysema, and she was in the hospital, and the doctors gave her whatever medications they had back then, and she got worse, and they told her she only had a few months to live. And she was really lucky that a relative brought a little book to the hospital. It was called the Mucusless Diet Healing System, which I'm sure you know of, Paul, by Arnold Ehret. And it just had come out in 1918, the original version of that book. And it was a little paperback. She said, I've got nothing to lose by reading this. She read the book and she checked herself out of the hospital, went home, and started her plant-powered lifestyle of mostly raw food. She had a little bit of steamed vegetables in the evening, but her day was raw fruits and vegetables. And I grew up with that story in my background. Now, most people do not have that kind of motivation that my grandmother had. And even when people are sick, they will try raw food for 2 weeks and they'll say it didn't work, and they'll go back to whatever they were doing. My grandmother was a single mom, and my father was only 4 years old. So she had an extra motivation that she was concerned that something was going to happen to her, and that maybe the doctors were right, that she was going to lose her life because her emphysema was so serious. And this plant-powered lifestyle worked for her. And I remember my grandmother living with us periodically as I was a child growing up, and her telling me her healing story of how she was no longer sick. Her asthma and her emphysema were gone after a matter of months. And so even though I knew that, my mother did not raise my sister and I on a plant-based diet because of her protein concerns. Always afraid we weren't going to get our protein needs met. So I grew up on a pretty much standard diet with a lot of animal foods and processed foods. I had all the childhood illnesses, ear infections, throat infections, flu every year, sometimes for as long as a month or more. And by the time I got to be a teenager, I had severe cystic acne all over my face and my back. In addition to that, a little bit later, in my teen years, I started having all kinds of digestive issues, irritable bowel, and going vegetarian at age 17 for ethical reasons. It did help, but it didn't really clear up my digestive issues because I was still eating a lot of dairy. And dairy, in my view, is like the most mucus forming substance on the planet. So I always recommend, first and foremost, people take dairy out. But that was one of the main culprits. And much later, when I started having my children at the end of the 1980s, I went vegan in 1989, and that's when I gave up the dairy. And voila, cystic acne gone in 3 months. No more cystic acne, like so dramatic. And, people were saying, well, you're older now, you're a mom, and that's why. And no, it was because I gave up dairy. And many people have that result when they give up dairy, that a lot of chronic illness and autoimmune conditions start to heal. And certainly changing the rest of the diet as well, giving up processed foods. But it wasn't until 1994 when I experienced the most profound healing. And my son, the first 3 years of his life, and we were vegan then, so this was even as vegans, my son had asthma and chronic ear infections. And I couldn't understand what was going on. We were vegan. My skin healed, other than I did have still scarring left over from the cystic acne. But my skin had healed after giving up dairy and going to vegan and more whole foods, even though I did still have a lot of pasta and bread in there, which is processed. But my son was sick on those same foods. And so in 1994, I decided that we would try a raw vegan lifestyle, going to Whole Foods raw. And we did juicing and green smoothies and fruits and veggies. And within a matter of months, I'd say between 10 to 11 months, my son's asthma and chronic ear infections were no longer there. They just halted very dramatically. And it was very clear to me that going vegan was not enough. We had to take a much larger step. And this created, in my view, Super Healthy Children, which is my website, Super Healthy Children. And I went on to write a book called Creating Healthy Children Through Attachment Parenting and Raw Foods. Raw foods being a big part in raising the healthiest kids. I have seen people do raw foods incorrectly, because there are also processed raw foods. There's a lot of marketing and mislabeling, and people can go in the wrong direction. And I did make a lot of mistakes at the beginning, but just going to raw food was able to heal my son, and the scarring I had left from the cystic acne completely healed.
Wow.
So both my son healed and I healed. And then I went on to work with, I became a health coach in 1998, went on to work with thousands of individuals and lots of families, and wrote more books. I have my recipe book, Raw Vegan Recipe Fun for Families. And then my most recent book, because I was a speech and language pathologist for 43 years. And the last 20 of those years was working with children with autism. I wrote my most recent book that came out last year is Heal and Prevent Autism, Natural Solutions That Work. And that book has a 3-page foreword from Dr. T. Colin Campbell, who wrote the longest nutrition study ever done, the China study. And the foreword is also with his son, Daniel Campbell, who's a special education teacher working with children with autism.
Wow. Wow. So that's an amazing story. Now, that would be wonderful if you went raw and everything was great, but you did have challenges along the way. And you stayed 100% raw, but your family went back and forth and some things. And so when I always ask people, I say the raw food diet for everyone. And from a physical standpoint, I think you and I are in agreement it's the best diet we can eat overall for our health if we do it the right way. The right way. But there's emotional and psychological and other differences that might not make it the best situation for everyone for where they're at in life. So there's more of a background to your story, and I'm so glad you stuck with the raw vegan diet over the years. You set a great example for your children that had left the raw vegan diet and came back to it, which is an amazing story. And even in your marriage, it wasn't, all right, we're going to do this together 100%, but you stuck with it.
And you know that, you were there. I spoke to you.
But you stuck with it.
Lots of conflict.
And, you know, one of the, these are some of the problems that prevent people or stop people from doing it. Not everyone in a household is in agreement with it. And it's too tiring, or it's too complicated to make food for 2 different types of diets or 3 different diets, depending. And, you know, but so explain to people that are going through this, why you made the decisions you make or made, and what they could do in these situations, you know, to help them get along with family members and spouses that might not be willing to do it all like you have. What's some suggestion and advice you can give to some people?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I rarely get during interviews. So I would say not to do what I did, because I really pushed hard. I was so gung-ho. I was so determined. I really wanted my kids to be fully raw. I wanted my husband to go along with it. And he wasn't there. He wasn't there yet. I really believe, looking back on it now, that I could have helped him to be more supportive by educating him. And one thing I did that was that I wouldn't take back was that I created a vegan home. I told my husband, I said, inside this house, we are vegan. And so that always stuck. And over the years, because he's social, because he loves being around people, he tagged along with me everywhere I spoke, every event I ever went to, and he listened. And over time, he became a vegetarian. And then more recently, just a couple of years ago, he became vegan on his own. So back then in 1994, when I transitioned my children and myself to raw vegan, he was still eating other foods outside of the home. He became vegetarian 10 years after we got married, but he was still eating a lot of dairy, which I consider the most toxic out of the food that is in the animal-based diet. And in terms of my kids, I think that you create your environment in your home, but there has to be some leeway with children as they get older, because you don't want to have all of this anger and defensiveness at a point where they're feeling the need to fit in. Now, it may be a perceived need, and there are some kids who just believe in your values so much that they take it with them, and they're okay to set their own role model in front of their friends. But when my kids got to be adolescent and teenager, after being raw vegan for over 10 years, they perceived that need to fit in. And it was hard for me. I struggled. I threatened, I bribed, I did whatever I could to try to keep my kids on the raw vegan diet, especially because I was concerned about my son and the asthma and chronic ear infections that he had earlier. And I was concerned about the asthma coming back, which it did not. It did not. So I think I set a really good early base for my kids. And that's what's most important. As parents, you are the center of their universe when they are young children. So your role model, the way that you eat in front of them, is the most important action that you can make for your kids to follow a healthy raw vegan lifestyle growing up. But when they get to a point where they're outside of the home more and they're not wanting to eat the way that you are prescribing. You just have that available at home, and you continue to be this strong, powerful model that they can follow. And both of my kids came back. My son during college went way off. I mean, it was he was vegan up until college. And his friends kind of coerced him into eating meat with them because they barbecued every day. And he did have the meat. And for the last 2 years, he was having meat, he was drinking, he got dermatitis. And he ended up coming home afterwards. And what did he do on his own? He came back to the way that he was originally raised on his own. And he came back to raw vegan, and it took time for his skin to heal. This was a big, big move for him. And he's back. And it's very exciting for me to see. And so it makes me feel now that parents don't need to stress out in that way that I did. Once my kids were out of the home, I told them, just don't tell me what you're eating, because that way I can think that you're eating all these healthy fruits and vegetables. And if you're not, you're eating other things that that would make me disappointed. Just don't tell me. So they didn't tell me.
Yeah. Okay, well, I have one more question for you about that, but then I want to talk to you about your particular diet and what's going on and your ideas about the raw food diet. But you said you put your foot down that the house was going to be a vegan home. And I've heard some other people do that, where their spouse said, no, that's not going to happen. So
And it
your
sometimes
husband
does.
was willing to at least go along with that. What's your advice for spouses that their spouse is not willing to go along with that? What would you suggest in those cases?
Yeah. So I would say have a pantry or a pantry section that is your vegan pantry. And I've really learned that stress is really even worse for your health than bad food. So you don't want to be in a perpetual state of stress, but you also want to set your model. And, you also want to have a talk with your partner and explain that this is very important to you, that you feel so much different, that you feel so much healthier. If you have had health challenges and they have been totally improved or turned around with going vegan, raw vegan, you can explain that and in a very loving way. And maybe your partner will support you. But if not, if your wife, husband, partner is not supporting you, then you just set up your own space, continue to present this powerful role model. And I believe your kids are going to be learning so much from you. And just make sure that your children have all of the availability to an abundance of fruits and vegetables. Kids love fruit. They love fruit. That's like the best way to go. And it's definitely the first food for baby. It's easy to digest, ripe fruit, and they love it. They love it.
Absolutely.
So I would say just take away the stress.
Great. Okay. So you mentioned earlier that the raw food diet is not always healthy. There's an unhealthy way to do it, and you made some mistakes. So what is an unhealthy way in your opinion, and what are some mistakes that you have made?
Well, one thing is that I see a lot of parents, and I've worked with thousands of families over the decades, and I've seen that they give their kids a lot of dried fruit. And I did the same, gave my kids a lot of dried fruit. Because we always think, kids want sweet stuff. They're not eating cookies and ice cream anymore. However, we can make some cookies and ice cream. I mean, we do banana ice cream and we add many different flavors to that. I love raspberry banana ice cream. That's like my favorite. But my kids also, when they went to birthday parties, I bought sometimes ice cream, vegan ice cream containers, spilled out the ice cream and made my own with banana ice cream and carob powder for a chocolatey taste and mango and just a couple dates. But I didn't go giving, like later on, I realized that my kids were having too much dried fruit. And so I did not continue that. I saw that that was problematic and for the teeth as well. And I see many parents having that problem with limiting dried fruit. So I would say that that was an issue for me because at
Well,
the
you said you
beginning I
realized
did
that. How'd you realize that? Was it their teeth issues?
dental issues.
Okay, okay. And what about
Yeah,
yourself? Had you been doing dried fruit at first, you for yourself?
I was doing dried fruit at first also and not seeing problems right away. It took time of eating dried fruit to see those problems. And I
Okay,
see a lot of raw vegans having those issues. So don't emphasize dried fruit. I
okay.
saw a lot of, like, I belonged to a group in New York City in the earlier years, like the first 10 years, and we had meetings every week. I know you were at some of those meetings. And a lot of them walking around with all these bags of dried dates and figs. And, we got to emphasize the fresh fruit, the water rich fruit, that those are the ones.
Okay.
So
So
that's one.
so dried fruit, okay.
That's one thing. I also see um, just a lot of fat. It's just way too high in fat sometimes. Now, kids do need some fat. I'm not saying they don't need fat, and especially during breastfeeding. A woman she has more energy demands placed on her body. She needs to have a higher fat diet. So I'm really in favor of a woman listening to what her needs are and not listening to some dietary recommendations of some raw vegan educators. I'm more about listening to the woman and her energy needs. So getting enough calories. I often see breastfeeding women trying to eat a low fat raw vegan diet. That very often doesn't work. So I've seen that over and over again. Can be problematic for the baby as well, and for the breast milk supply.
What about women
Um,
that are have conceived and are pregnant and gonna have children? Do you think a raw vegan diet is still the ideal way to do it if they do it the right way, or do you
if
think?
they do it the right way, if they do it the right way. But I've had women come to me in the middle of pregnancy wanting to go to a 100% raw vegan diet. And I tell them, not a good idea right now. I said, you can go high raw, but I wouldn't want you to detoxify so much during pregnancy. Now that's different after the baby's born. If a woman wants to go to a 100% raw vegan diet, when the baby's born, even while she's nursing, that's fine because the baby's there. You can see the baby if the baby's having reactions. You cannot always feel what's going on when a woman is pregnant. And so I don't always recommend the total switch during pregnancy. There was one woman who came to me and she said, Karen, I'm going to do it whether you help me with it or not. She was so determined. She had been vegan for a while. And so because she was vegan and already eating mostly whole foods, I felt more comfortable to help her transition during pregnancy. But for most people, I tell them, yeah, you can go high raw. And I help them to be able to do that in a way that's going to be beneficial for them during pregnancy. And then if they want to go fully raw, they can do it after the baby is born.
Okay, so dried fruit, and then you said the high fat. Now, was the high fat something you struggled with as well, or was it just a
I
dried?
ate loads of fat at the beginning. The
Okay,
first few years, loads of fat and oil. Lots of oil too, oily food. I
and
used a lot of
what's
oily
another
food.
mistake that you think you've made, or something you see people making?
Well, certainly using a lot of oil, and even a little bit of oil. I learned that oil is highly processed, and I don't recommend oils at all. So
Okay,
I try to encourage women having children, and also families and even individuals to try to get off that oil. We don't need it.
Now,
We don't need the oil. It's
you've been on,
100% fat.
yeah, you've been on an all raw vegan diet now for 27 years,
28.
28 years. Okay. And if you don't mind me asking, what's your age, what's your age and your weight?
So I am 68, and my weight is about 115 pounds, which I look to maintain at all times. I lost a lot of weight. I was like emaciated when I first went raw vegan, even a high fat raw vegan diet. And I believe now, looking back at that, that it was my change in diet and all of those false foods that I was eating, that my body was purging, that made me lose the weight.
What do you mean the
So,
false foods? What do you mean?
I mean, all the processed stuff,
Got you.
getting rid of the pastas and the breads, all the processed foods that I was taking out, and going to real whole foods.
Sure.
And raw also caused a tremendous detoxification process. But at the same time, I also wasn't getting enough calories. So I went from eating, a plate of pasta and some cooked vegetables to eating raw fruits and vegetables, and in the same amount. So like a plateful. No, I had to look at it completely differently. So the only way that I gained the weight was by looking at the calories that I was getting from fruit. So I had to increase the amount of fruit that I was eating. Once I increased the amount of fruit that I was eating, I gained the weight. I went down to like 85 pounds.
Wow.
I mean, it was, even my father, who was a vegan and eating a lot of raw food because he was raised by my grandmother, who had changed her diet back in 1921. And they were all about raw vegan, even when that word didn't exist. Even my father was telling me, I think you should go back to cooked food. You need to gain some weight. You're emaciated. And so I spoke with somebody at that time, a raw vegan coach, who advised me to get more calories in through fruit. So I tripled the amount that I was eating. And so a lot of people feel they're not feeling comfortable with adding that amount of fruit. And so they just go back to their vegan diet or something else. But I really felt that I wanted to go with this, especially because of my son's asthma. And I stuck with it.
Well, as you got down to 85 pounds, I mean, were your kids going to the doctor? Was there ever any governmental officials that had concern, or did that ever come up an issue for your family, or never?
It did not. And the reason that it did not is because we had a pediatrician who totally supported us.
Okay,
I would go to he's retired now, unfortunately, but this doctor, when I brought my kids to him and I spoke with him at length, he would tell my kids, just listen to your mom. She knows everything about health and nutrition. He totally supported me. And he supported me through the whole child rearing process. And he knew that I had a background in child development. But even if I didn't have that strong background in child development, he believed in what I was doing. And he felt that it was a really great way to raise my kids. And he even said to me, because my kids were growing very slowly, they were on the lower 10 percentile, but they were still on the charts and they were still growing, but they were always on the lowest percentile, sometimes 5%. And he just said, they're not taking in growth hormones, so they're going to grow more slowly. And he just backed up the whole way of eating. And he knew I was a raw vegan. He backed that up. But he backed me up when I was vegan, and he backed me up when I went raw vegan. So I was fortunate that I had him. I went to a couple of other doctors who also supported the way I was raising my kids. And so that's really what you have to look for. And he wasn't even a vegan, this doctor. But he did advise people to eat a lot of plant foods. So you just really need to look for a doctor who is more plant-based and not so much into giving out drugs. That's really what you need to look for. And I would say before you sign up with any doctor, and I only saw the pediatrician once a year for a wellness visit for my kids, just once a year. After we went raw vegan, like their eyes were clear, their skin was clear, they didn't have any sicknesses, the ear, the mucus was gone, and they were happy, vibrant, bright, receptive, communicative kids.
Sure. So,
Homeschooling was also great. Homeschooling was another way
absolutely.
that we, that we kind of avoided all of the problems that can happen when you're in the system.
Sure. So, I mentioned earlier that there aren't many long-term raw foodists that are women that I know of. Most of them are men. Has that been your experience? And if so, why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I do know some women. And it's interesting that when I have classes and events, it's mostly women who attend.
Yeah,
But I do agree with you. I do agree with you that there is a high interest in women, but women, I think because of emotionally fitting in, it might be more important for them to emotionally fit in. So over the long term, they may not stick with it as well as a man coming in. For him, it's more about personal health. And I think that he might stick with it longer and may not need as much of the coaching. I don't know what it is, but I usually have my classes filled with women and only a couple of men.
Wow. Wow.
But I agree with you. I do see a lot of women falling off. But some of them come back. Some of them come back. And I do know some women who have been doing this long term.
Wonderful. So what about you? So how much sleep do you get every night?
When I first went raw vegan, I thought I could get by with 4 or 5 hours of sleep. I thought the only thing that was important was food. I didn't even think I needed to exercise. So I would just, I was working to grow my health coaching business and super motivated. And I didn't think I needed a whole lot of exercise. Well, oh boy, I found out the hard way that those lifestyle factors are really way up there with food. So getting enough exercise, getting enough sleep is really important. So I get like at least 8 hours of sleep a night. And I would say as I'm getting older, and I'm a grandma now, my grandchildren know me as Mimi. And I love to sleep. So when I'm not helping and taking care of them, I'm definitely, like, sometimes we've had to get up really early, like at 5:30 in the morning to be over there to help out. But on the days in between, I'm making sure that I get 8, sometimes 10 hours of sleep.
Sure. So
So
you're in
I want to
agreement that
get my
sleep
sleep.
is so
My sleep
important.
is
Yeah.
valuable to me now, whereas it wasn't in the earlier days. And for people who are listening to this and who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s, and you're not getting enough sleep, go there, get the sleep that you need.
Sure. And over the years, have you gotten your blood work done?
I have gotten my blood work done. Everything has come out normal. And I also get nutritional analysis done. I had one done just recently, a couple months ago. And there have only been a couple of things that I've really needed to focus on more, that were not in the deficient range, but that were just a little bit lower. For example, B12. So it wasn't deficient, but it was a little lower than I would want it to be. So I did do a water fast for 3 days. Sometimes going on a water fast can help to regulate that um, through maybe increasing the hydrochloric acid in the stomach can help to better absorb the B12. Got another nutrition test, and the B12 was still on a bit low. And B12 is not something I want to fool around with. So I do take a B12 supplement, but I'm not a pusher of multivitamins when I'm getting so much nutrition in the whole plant food that I eat. And I also stress local, local as much as possible. I live in New Jersey, so getting local fruit year round is not so much of a possibility, but certainly the local greens and vegetables, I get local year round, because even when I can't have plants in a garden, or sometimes I have these planters on my deck, even in the winter time, I go to a local farmer who has greenhouses. So I will be getting local vegetables, because we lose nutrition so quickly in our plants after they're harvested that we absolutely must focus on local. So those of the people who are watching this, if you're getting all of your food packaged from Costco or some of these local health food stores that are bringing them in from faraway places, just realize that even if you're eating healthy whole plant foods, that your blood work, your nutrition analysis might come out with deficiencies.
So what's more important? Because if you are in New York or New Jersey, you can't eat local fruit in the wintertime for the most part. Maybe some apples, but for the most part, you can't. So is it better to maybe eat some starches and some grains if you're in a colder environment where you can't get fruit, or is it better to try to stay in a limited local amount, or get fruit non-locally? Well, in your opinion, do you think it's based on the situation, or do you think 100%, even if you can't go local, 100% raw vegan is the best? What's your opinion on?
Yeah. I feel that we are designed to be fruit eaters. So I feel wherever we are in the world, we must eat fruit. We must eat plentiful amounts of fruit. I don't try to take everybody to 100% raw if they're not ready, willing, and happy to go there, because we should be happy with what we're eating. So if it means that you go high raw and you have some of those tubers in there and some steamed veggies, things like that, I mean, some people just need to do that. It depends on where somebody is in their health journey to where they're going to go. But I am not dogmatic with each person saying that they must go 100%. For me, I feel that we are designed to eat a raw vegan diet. And I really do strongly believe, and especially with these studies that came out in 2002 about acrylamides, these studies that started in Sweden at the University of Stockholm about high cooking temperatures. And anything like above steaming already forms a plastic-like coating around the food that is unhealthful for the body. These scientists even claim that they're carcinogenic, even things like baked potatoes. So those studies really spoke to me about cooking. And that's why for me, even staying raw in New Jersey, but taking my vacation certainly in the wintertime. And for those of you who can get away, getting away in the winter, getting sunshine, going to a tropical or subtropical environment where you can get the sunshine, be outdoors. That's what we're also designed to do and how to live, and getting fruit that's local. So I do go to Costa Rica, Florida in the cold months. because I want that local food and I want that sunshine. Don't want to be indoors all the time.
Sure.
So yes, I believe that this diet is the best. I am convinced. I've been researching and studying for many, many years. I have a lot of research in my books. And I feel that that's really the best way. But not everybody wants to go 100% or is in the place to do it in a way that's going to make them happy. And stress is a part of it. And so there are different ways to do it and still be healthy.
Yes, yes. Okay. And just to let everybody know, I'm putting a link below the video to all of Karen's website and the social media and her books. So all that's below the video. So you can just click on those after this interview and you can check those out. So Karen, what about water? How much water do you drink and what kind of water do you drink?
It depends on where I am. Right now we're in Colorado and my daughter has a Berkey filter that I bought for her. And they live in between two mountains and they have well water. So it is cleaner. It's been tested and it's really, really clean, good water. But there was some arsenic in there. And I had a concern about that. So I sent them the Berkey filter and that filters out the arsenic, but they have a pretty clean water supply. Whereas in New Jersey, when the water was tested, there were loads of chemicals. And so I got reverse osmosis, but I also recommend distilled water. So reverse osmosis, distilled, I know people say, well, with reverse osmosis and distilled, it takes out all the minerals. But if you're eating a lot of mineral-rich green vegetables, you're going to be getting a lot of minerals there. So I'm not really that concerned about that. I don't drink as much water as other people need to have. Like even the recommendation of 8 glasses of water a day with an all-cooked food diet is not enough water. It's not enough. You need to be eating the water-rich foods. So I eat all water-rich foods during the day. And if I had water, if I had 8 glasses of water or more, I'd literally be in the bathroom all day. So,
Well,
on
I
really
want,
hot days, I'm drinking more water.
yeah.
And when I'm getting, days when I'm getting a lot of exercise, I feel like I do need to have some water in between my meals.
Make
But
sure your daughter is on the Berkey. Make sure she's checking the red dye test because I have a Berkey and I'm very disappointed. Just about
really,
every time I take the test, they fail. And a lot of people get it; they think they're protected, but you got to take the red dye test every 4 months and make sure that it's still working. Because even though they say they work for 8 months, they don't work for 8 months. I mean, for 8 years, they don't. So make sure she's testing it every 4 months because a lot of them fail and people in essence are drinking tap water without knowing it. But
oh, wow.
yeah,
I will
so
tell her that.
but if it does what it's supposed to do, it's a great system. But that's been my experience. So
Yeah, it
you
certainly
mentioned
looks like it.
yes, you mentioned earlier about exercise that you didn't at first. But what about now? How important is that to you now?
Exercise is, I believe, also as important as sleep and way up there with what you eat. So, the goal is to get 10,000 steps in every day. That's the goal. So we do a lot of hiking and walking, and I jump on a rebounder every day, at least 5 to 6 days a week, sometimes 7. And that I jump on for like 25, 30 minutes. I have a whole routine. And I also believe that weight resistance is really important. So lifting weights, and if you're not lifting weights, doing some kind of weight resistance activity, such as, even yoga, doing a lot of downward dog, that's weight resistance, doing any kind of lifting. And for people with kids, like your kids are weights. So if you're carrying a baby, you're getting in some weightlifting. I've been carrying around my 25-year-old granddaughter. Whenever she wants, I'm picking her up. And when I'm back home, I'm lifting
Oh, your
weights.
granddaughter's not 25 years old.
20, did I say 25 years
Yeah,
old?
yeah,
Oh my goodness, what a
yeah.
mistake. Okay, so 25 pounds. She's 25
25
pounds.
pound. Yeah, yeah.
And I'm carrying her a lot, carrying her around.
Wow.
And I
That's
really
all.
believe very strongly in attachment parenting. So if your kids want holding, please do hold them as much as they want. Don't put them down if they don't want to be put down. They're going to just thrive, and you don't have to worry about them, the crawling, and they will do everything that they need to do, even if you're holding them for long periods.
Okay. We have a couple more topics before we finish it. One is fasting. Have you done a lot of water fasting over the years?
I did in the past. I've fasted for as much as 2 weeks at a time, done many 1 week water fasts on my own, and 3 or 4 day fasts. And I don't recommend it as much as I used to, unless somebody is in a really life-threatening situation. I've just seen people go into a lot of deficiencies with long-term water fasting. So I think one must be really careful and also be monitored regularly. So if somebody's doing more than like 3 days on water, they need to be supervised. So I don't recommend these long, I've seen people do these 35-day water fasts. I recommend supervision from
Okay.
somebody who's going to totally be on it and monitoring you. But I have done some, and I have found them to be very beneficial. I have not done more than 2 weeks. I don't recommend that thin people do these long water fasts.
My one of my things I found most important on this diet is not to eat late at night. And I have a book called The Daylight Diet. And what's your opinion about the times we eat our food? Not just what we eat, but about the times we eat our food.
So important. So important what you're saying about the daylight diet. Because, and for me, like when you were just talking about sleep, I had insomnia where I was not sleeping. I would go to sleep and I would be turning and tossing for hours. Once I started having my last meal earlier, and I'm talking about sometimes my last meal is at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock the latest. And then I have at least 4 hours with no food coming in, no digesting, and then going to sleep. Huge difference. Huge difference. So I am 100% in favor of the daylight diet for sure.
Wonderful. And over the years, what are some people you've looked at and learned from when it comes to the raw food nutrition and just living healthy? And even now, people that you have followed or follow that that really have helped make changes in your life.
Yeah. Well, I would say, Paul, that I've known you since the beginning, and you and I talked since the earlier days. So you were always someone who I could go to and get great information from. Also, Dr. Doug Graham. He's someone who I've hosted you for events in New Jersey. I hosted him for events, learned so much from him. Even some of the vegan medical doctors that I mean, I don't follow 100% because they don't prescribe a raw vegan diet, but certainly they don't prescribe a raw vegan diet, but they certainly do prescribe a healthy whole vegan diet. So I did learn a lot from Dr. Joel Furman, Dr. Michael Greger, Dr. Neil Barnard. Those were some of the earlier people who motivated me when I was going vegan, and raw food. Some of the very earlier books. There's a book called Toxemia Explained by John Tilden. That book just changed my life. And The Mucusless Diet Healing System by Arnold Ehret changed my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are definitely some of the earlier people and books. Also, Dr. Will Tuttle. and his book, The World Peace Diet. Just wonderful about just what's really going on in this world of killing animals and why we don't want to eat animals and why we don't want to feed our kids food that comes from the animal kingdom.
Wonderful. Now, you've traveled the world, and I know you travel often, and you've eaten a lot of different fruits. Of all the fruits you've ever eaten, what is your favorite fruit?
Ooh, there's so many that are tied for number one. There is a fruit that you can't get very often, and we've had it in Costa Rica, and my son Marco Ranzi is growing that fruit in Costa Rica. He has a fruit farm, and it is called Rollinia. It's in Costa Rica, in Spanish, they call it beriba. Biriba.
I have a tree of it in my yard.
Oh, wow,
Yeah,
nice.
it's wonderful. It's a tropical fruit. It's a part of the
Yeah.
Annona family, like
It tastes like a lemon meringue pie.
Yeah, it's amazing. Rollinia. Now, not everyone likes it, but so that's your favorite one. Wow.
That's like one of my favorites, but there's some wonderful varieties of mango. Even at a local store here in Colorado, I've been getting these huge mangoes. They're Kent mangoes, and they've been amazing. I also love figs, fresh figs during fig season.
Sure.
Those are just, I'll have a whole mono meal of figs. And what else? I mean, I love all of the fruits. Those are just some of my really top choices.
Well, I'm definitely gonna interview your son Marco and about his fruit farm, and we're gonna talk about that in the future. But I thank you so much for coming on here today. And again, everybody, I'm gonna put the links to Karen's books and her website and all her information below. So definitely check them out. Karen, in closing, what else do you want to share with the audience before we end here today?
I just want to say, if anyone wants to contact me, especially, families raising healthy children, healthy vegan children, my website, superhealthychildren.com, has a lot of information on how to raise the healthiest vegan kids. There's also a contact page there, and my website, feelfabulouswithfood.com, has information about my health coaching, and also about my vegan certification course, where I teach vegans how to go out into the world and become highly qualified and successful health coaches and help us spread this valuable message.
And I know you said you do some health classes. Is that online or in person?
I do both. I do online and in person. A lot of it is online, of course. I do. I have a free Facebook group called Plant Foods Weight Loss, Hormonal and Gut Health, because so many people have gut health issues, and that's related to any health issue you can have, depending on where you're most susceptible, can stem from gut health issues. So there's free Facebook Lives and free ebooks and information in there. And that's at that site, Plant Foods Weight Loss, Hormonal and Gut Health. And I have a free newsletter, my Super Healthy Raw newsletter, at superhealthychildren.com.
Okay, and are all your books at superhealthychildren.com as well?
All of my books are at
Okay.
superhealthychildren.com.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's great catching up with you. Thank you for being on the show, and keep up the great work. And it's so great. And I look forward to seeing you in person again and hanging out. But thank you again. After all these years, we've made it. We're still doing this, and we're teaching this. And I love that you're teaching this to people. And I encourage you to keep going. And I thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. It was awesome to talk to you today, and so great that we've been doing this for decades together.
Yes. All right. All right.
Nature's wealth, good for your health. This is the Raw Life Health Show. Raw Life, brighten up your life.